Okay. Good evening. It's Diane Sayre, and welcome to the New York Symposium with Diane Sayre. I'm an independent LaRouche candidate running for U.S. Senate in 2024, and we will be discussing tonight the great composer Handel and his collaboration with circles involved in creating the Republic of the United States, which didn't yet exist, obviously, in the 1700s. Before we get to that, let me just say a couple of things. One, I participated earlier today in a really excellent rally at the United Nations, which was organized by a student with a group called the Young Americans for Liberty. We had about 20 people there demanding that the U.S. stop arming Ukraine, that there be negotiations, that the U.S. should leave NATO, and we get off the trajectory toward nuclear war. And what was striking to me is the young person who organized this rally said that he said, I've never organized a demonstration before. I just felt like I had to really do something. So of the participants, at least half of them were under the age of 27, I would say. And it was really fun seeing the diplomats from the United Nations, because I'm sure everybody in the world is wondering, where is the anti-war movement in the United States? And so as some of them would pass by, you'd see them kind of do a double take, look at the signs, and then point, and then begin smiling. So our voice is really urgently needed. Now, tomorrow, starting at 10 a.m., there will be a very important conference of the Schiller Institute, moderated by Dennis Speed, who many of you know, taking up this question of the Assassination Bureau. We had, of course, Martin Luther King, whose birthday we're celebrating this weekend, was assassinated in 1968. And we had 4 assassinations, or actually more, but the major ones: John F. Kennedy in 1963, Malcolm X in 1965, Martin Luther King in 68, and then Bobby Kennedy in 68. And we've never bothered to get to the truth about these assassinations, even though the family members do not believe the stories of the lone assassins. And that has allowed our nation to be controlled by exactly the entities that ran this. So tomorrow at 10 a.m., schillerinstitute.com, I would really encourage people to tune into that. Now, today, the Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida Fumio, was in meetings with President Joe Biden. And, the United States has a problem, or I shouldn't say the United States because they don't represent us, but the British Empire, the billionaires who are bankrupt, who really want to have a war and conflict to distract from the economic collapse, or have an excuse to not have to pay the $2 quadrillion in derivatives obligations held by the City of London and Wall Street, ran into some problems. In spite of Nancy Pelosi and 10 congressmen flying over to Taiwan, the population there in the last elections rejected the pro-independence party, going more with the Kuomintang tradition. And it means that Taiwan also may be watching what's happening in Ukraine, which is merely a proxy where people are just being ground into hamburger meat. And we tell them, keep fighting, we'll arm you. We're sure you can beat Russia, which is, of course, absurd. And you're having massive death and destruction, which, according to Colonel Douglas McGregor, from reports he's gotten from on the ground, the Ukrainian people are beginning to feel very badly used and abused. Zelensky has begun rounding up priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. He stripped 13 of them of their citizenship. It said that they are being tortured, etc. And 2/3 of the Christians in Ukraine are in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Now they're creating an Orthodox Ukrainian church loyal to Zelensky, but you can imagine under these conditions, people are saying, what is going on here? We were told that we would be backed up in this war with Russia. We're getting ground up and we're under a fascist dictatorship. So that's a horrific situation, and anyone from outside looking at it would have to say, do we want to be the same thing? Do the people of Taiwan want to be cannon fodder for a proxy war against China? They voted no. So now the idea is to recruit Japan. And speaking of assassinations, remember the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who was establishing good relations with Russia and moving in that direction with China, was assassinated. He wasn't prime minister at the time, but obviously that sends a certain message to those networks. And now what you have are all kinds of new defense agreements with Japan, which, remember, at World War II was to be not have a military, etc. Now we're talking about defending Japan with nuclear weapons over the Senkaku Islands, over which they could have a dispute with China. So if the Taiwan option doesn't work, maybe we can figure out how to get Japan in a war with China so we can have a war with China. And NATO has very explicitly said that China and Russia are the major threats to the world order, which is really outrageous. They're not our enemies, but we will make them our enemies if we continue with this as we have already. I mean, we're virtually in a war with Russia at this point. And that is why I am saying that the offer of the Vatican to hold negotiations is urgent and should be accepted with no preconditions. That's what they're saying. Very important. Because when you get to a conflict between nuclear superpowers, and you have some people who are insane enough to think there's such a thing as a winnable nuclear war or a limited nuclear war, then really the whole world is in trouble. So that's why I was at the demonstration today at the UN. There's another major rally tomorrow at Times Square, but I would urge people to tune in at 10 a.m. from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. to the Schiller Institute. So this evening, we will be hearing, and I think it's also very good to consider how people in different times dealing with similar problems dealt with them. And we discussed last week Mozart's librettist, who was Italian but became a New Yorker, Lorenzo da Ponte, was in the circles of James Fenimore Cooper, and all of the people, the intellectual leadership of the American Revolution. This is not a coincidence. Freedom is critical. You can't be creative. Freedom and creativity go together, and they're not arbitrary, and beauty is not arbitrary. So it is not a surprise, perhaps, that the composer Handel, who wrote so much really beautiful music, was part of circles dealing with countering the oppression of the British Empire in Ireland and elsewhere. And I'm not going to say more about it. I'm going to turn it over to our speakers this evening. I will say, as always, participation in the SARE for Senate Symposium does not constitute endorsement of my or any political campaign. I and my guests are expressing views that are our own. We don't necessarily agree on everything. And the purpose of this is to allow the kind of dialogue that allows the citizens to be informed about very important topics that aren't normally discussed. So first, we will have Colin Hart, who is a music teacher in New York, the New York Public Schools, and Queens and Lehman College. He is a musician himself, an ethnomusicologist, an author. and a student and teacher of Irish music. So, Colin, welcome, and we're happy to have you. And go right ahead with what you'd like to say.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. This is an interesting panel, so I'm very happy to be here. I just figured I'd give some context to this discussion of Handel and his wonderful piece of the Messiah and how it took shape in Dublin. But just to kind of give some historical context to understand Ireland during that time period, what became during that, and a bit before as well. Particularly with this conversation about colonialism and imperialism and thinking of proxy wars even. Um, I mean, Ireland, it's an island with a history of invasions, going way back. But if we're thinking even from the Vikings into the Norman invasions, the 1100s onwards, there was an increasing interest by the English government to control Ireland in different ways. First, with sort of establishing kind of forts or bases, castles there in which they were garrisons, and then slowly increasing those networks to control the Irish aristocracy. And eventually, the people and the land itself was a giant land grab by the before Handel came, but maybe 100 years or so, a bit before that. Um, and so it's interesting to kind of think about seats of power and thinking about ethnicity, culture, language, music's ways of sort of expressing that. And so there's a couple of things to kind of keep in mind about this as we're discussing it. One is that one of the first Norman strongholds. I mean, if you look at geography, is on the eastern coast of Ireland, right in the area of Dublin, which was sort of a Norse Irish town that built because of its proximity to the ocean in terms of trade. But that was one of the first Norman landings in areas of consolidation of power. And so from there, you have a spreading out both north, west, and south from there into sort of parts of Louth and Meath, Westmeath, Kildare, Offaly, Laois, of what they would call the Pale. And this was an area that was protected increasingly by walls, military garrisons, etc., by the English. It was English language was the language of business and daily exchange. Obviously, there was Irish peasants there working, but it was controlled, and the laws that governed the land in that portion of Ireland was known as the Pale, and that was where the English felt most at home and most where their power was based. And so, if we're thinking about it in contrast to this, if we're going to use this sort of binary, which becomes more and more consolidated as we go through history on the island of Ireland, of sort of English and then eventually Protestant versus Irish Catholic. The Pale is an important concept to think about in relation to the larger island, which would have been, Gaelic speaking, the Irish peasantry, and as well as the Irish aristocracy there. That shift kind of a process of hundreds of years of looking to control, destabilize, and eventually take the island of Ireland by the English crown. And when you kind of mentioned proxy war, it was seen as sort of the back door into England and seen as a threat, as a place to invade England by both the French and the Spanish, depending on the time period. So the idea that to control that portion of land, it was really important strategically thinking. And so there was a long process of this. If we're thinking about, 1366, the Statutes of Kilkenny, which sort of nailed down these social practices that you must do business in English. Intermarriage isn't allowed. The use of the Irish language and dress isn't permitted within these sort of areas of Englishness, in forts, castles, and the very surrounding areas. And so there's a desire to control that narrative not allowing the people who live there to become Irish, which would be a natural process since you live there, but to maintain the distance and this sort of boundary. And I think some of that, when we think about English colonies abroad, even in the US, this very strong um, delineating portion of what is Englishness, what is Irishness, or what is Englishness and what is otherness is really important to think about. By 1607, you have the Flight of the Earls, which is where the Irish aristocracy leaves. It is forced out and leaves the lands open for the plantation of Ulster, the first English plantation. Um, as a colony, you have Cromwell come around in about 1649 and just decimates majority of the rebellions with the Irish aristocracy. And with that, there's a huge land grab where people loyal to Cromwell and the crown seize Irish lands. The peasants lose any sort of ownership of that, but they're expected to continue working it and paying taxes via food, money, etc., cattle. And a lot of the people that own these lands are absentee landlords. And so it's seen as a business. It's seen as exploiting the peasantry and the land as much as possible. And not as many of these landlords are no longer living there, there's a detachment from the people, from the land, from the daily life, which leads to horrible consequences for the actual people of Ireland. And they're now under no longer Irish Brehon law, but English law. And so if we kind of are moving ourselves towards, the time of Handel and whatnot, there's a long history of sort of Irish aristocracy patronage of bards, particularly traveling harpists and poets, etc. And that landscape changes after Cromwell, particularly incredible change. And so you have a number of musicians trying to negotiate that and make sense of that. And at the same time, you have the ascendancy of the Anglo-Protestant aristocracy in Dublin, in the Pale, and looking to England for some of its cues culturally and in terms of signaling that they're in keeping with what's in vogue with the Anglo aristocracy there, and at the same time they're also looking to continental Europe for some of the cultural cues there as well. So it's an interesting time period to think about what's going on, where you have a Gaelic population that's been literally pushed westward off the lands, or they remain there as non-land owning farmers, tenant farmers. There's a distancing of the landlord from the actual land. So there's just looking towards it as a means of profit, and increasingly at any cost. The sort of, at that time period, there was not a government structure for relief. It was seen as if the people on your land, if you owned it as a landlord, you were responsible for that, and your ability to handle that or not handle that was left up to you. And so you could imagine that had some really disastrous consequences. There were some amazing landlords in different time periods where some of them went bankrupt from trying to help the peasantry. So, I mean, there's a wide variety of histories there. But what I'm moving towards here is the 1740 famine, which is based on a giant freeze, and there's discussions of the cattle dying, the potato crop dying, the grain dying. They said even in that spring afterwards that there was less chirping, that the number of birds that died from that freeze, grains being gone, and so you have a starving populace. And so rather than, if you look to, like, say, France, Prussia, which had a more of an infrastructure to support and buy up grain to support the populace, this was not there in Ireland. There was a bit of an indifference to that. So you have an increase in the number of people in the poorhouses, in the which would have been basically our ideas of prisons or jails, because for stealing food they're starving to death. The numbers of deaths is incredible, and I mean, it's just remarkable to see that. I think they said the equivalent was to the deaths in Ireland from this was in Norway, where again it was a foreign king in Denmark, and the people starved at numbers that were incredible because there was not the infrastructure, resources, or interest to support this. Um, so having Handel come in to do for his own personal interests as well, to do the Messiah and to have it received in the Pale in Dublin is an interesting thing. In that, I mean, it's notated music. It's coming and supported by the Anglo aristocracy. The majority of the Irish peasantry would not have had access to that, and would have been outside of that sort of realm of influence altogether. And so, there's a discussion of charity and lifting up of the human spirit and whatnot. I find it really fascinating, kind of Handel as an outsider presenting this music in this really kind of changing landscape, and it's just this difference in the complete power structure of the island. We have people who are literally starving to death, and hundreds of thousands of people, and then you have people who are putting on a concert, and have giant private stocks of grain and food, and this foreshadows the great potato famine later, which we won't get into, but you can already see the policies and the ways in which to treat the peasantry, to treat famine, to treat poverty, and those things are disastrous for this famine, and even more so later down the road. So I don't want to paint too stark a portrait, and we were limited in time, so I didn't want to get off too far on this. But at least want to kind of put some context when people are thinking about, well, is there Irish traditional music in this, or what is the connection between this? There is this clear divide between sort of Gaelic Irish peasantry, and the Pale and the Anglo aristocracy, and the people that would have lived in Dublin, both Irish Catholics and Irish Protestants, and the people there. So I just wanted to create that. So I hope that's enough context. It may have been too much or too little, but I'm happy as we continue to kind of pepper in more stuff. And I'm fascinated to hear about the research done with Handel.
Well, David, I will first thank you. And yes, you can come back in and add thoughts as we hear from David Shaven, who is, like myself, a longtime associate of Lyndon LaRouche and the Schiller Institute. He is a professional violinist, historian, and revolutionary. I'll say a volunteer revolutionary. So, all right, David, it's all yours. Thank you.
Oh, now I'm unmuted.
Yep.
All right, good. Well, thanks for that, Colin. Very interesting. I mean, to situate it, Handel's Messiah was presented in Dublin first in 1742, but it's to be understood not so much in terms of, it would have been nice if general population was already in a middle class and could attend concerts and have good culture, but it was really to be understood as a political fight against empire, certainly primarily in London, but also a response to what was going on in Ireland with the starvation. We don't know exactly why Handel was invited by the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland to come on a tour of Ireland and do concertize. He was there for 10 months. He accepted it, fortunately, right at the time he had finished the Messiah oratorio. So the Messiah oratorio of Handel was a deliberate intervention into English culture by means of a chorus project at a time when there were no obvious political options available. He engaged the population in a universal problem, common to everyone, but rarely solved, that of mortality and the meaning of their lives. And he did it in a way that engages them for a sustained period of time. The Messiah is over 2 hours, with music that proves to them that they have a direct relationship to beauty and are better than they think they are. Get the picture up of Caroline. Handel's choral project came after a quarter of a century working with the English court on good, though less powerful works. His collaborator was Princess and then the Queen, Caroline. the last royal student of the philosopher Gottfried Leibniz. Leibniz was, by the way, the one responsible for the conception of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness in the U.S. Declaration of Independence. And we can talk about that another time. That would take too much time now. Handel's chorus project was born with the premature death of his dear collaborator, Queen Caroline. I'll give a too quick sketch of the background on Handel with Caroline, and then we'll hear a bit of the Messiah. We'll go through that. Maybe put up an image of Leibniz there. So in 1709, Leibniz's associate, Baron Johann Adolf von Kielmansegge, recruited the young Handel to join Leibniz and Princess Caroline at the court in Hanover, Germany. It was run by Leibniz's patroness, Sophie. Caroline was married to Sophie's grandson, was the connection. They were to be the next rulers in England. Handel was appointed the Kapellmeister, the head of music at the court. And Sophie wrote that Handel, as a young man, he surpasses everyone who has ever been heard in harpsichord playing and composition. And maybe put up Swift there. Handel's involved in the networks of Leibniz and Jonathan Swift in the efforts from 1710 to 1713 to work out agreements between England's Queen Anne and the appointed successor to her, Leibniz's Sophie. However, Sophie's son, the future King George I, the first of the line that still rules Britain today, was controlled by opponents of Leibniz. He fired Handel in early 1713 at the same time that he takes overt measures against Leibniz. That's also another story. In England, Handel, still supported by a group around John Arbuthnot, Queen Anne's physician, and that group includes Leibniz's defender Kielmansegge, who recruited Handel, who famously organized the 1717 water music intervention upon King George I. For the next 3 decades, Handel was supported by Caroline. She was princess. She became queen in 1727. He composed the coronation music for King George II and Queen Caroline. She had him teach her children for quite a long period of time. When Caroline died, somewhat unexpectedly in 1737, I noted a big change in Handel. He composes a remarkable work called the Funeral Anthem for Queen Caroline. Very quickly, the opening chorale that Handel employed, Herr Jesu, du höchste Gut, excuse my German, lack of German, dealing with Jesus in terms of the highest good, strikes a Leibnizian chord. It's common to both Handel's and Caroline's shared heritage. It's, in a certain sense, it's a very personal work. And it has everything to do with the beginning of Handel's thinking about oratorios and eventually the Messiah. Of some note, the text goes on to describe Caroline's compassion for the downtrodden. It reads, "She delivered the poor that cried, the fatherless, and him that had none to help him," unquote. Later, Mozart was very impressed by Handel's funeral anthem, and he used a key element of it for the very poignant opening of his own famous Requiem. Now, a special note for our purposes, the funeral anthem was Handel's first vocal work without any solo arias or recitatives. Instead, the chorus carries the weight. They get transformed, being enriched with the variegated tasks that previously have been assigned to soloist. It's not a stretch to identify it as the birth of Handel's Republican chorus project. And just to say the obvious, a chorus is a whole bunch of people. It's not just a couple of, well, I'll get to that. Over the next 4 years, culminating in his 1741 Messiah, that's when he composed it, Handel further developed this chorus principle. And I suspect that Handel mobilized his passion and his skills because his best hope for his country, Queen Caroline, was gone. And thus mass organizing on a high level became the order of the day. There wasn't some way to configure the powers that be in London. Choruses from a time no later than classical Greece have always been about putting the audience's thought process on stage so that they could be examined in a not self-conscious way. in a rather healthy way. The Messiah has a dynamic role for the chorus in interchange with the remarkable material, usually introduced by the four soloists in the Messiah, but in a dynamic interplay with the chorus, and we're going to examine that shortly. Let me put up the image of Charles Jennens. So Handel worked with Charles Jennens on several texts between 1737 and 1741, biblical oratorio Saul, along with settings of major poems of John Milton. And this is all involving developing the character of the chorus. Jennens may also have had a role with Handel's oratorio Israel in Egypt, that's not sure. What Jennens said is, I hope that he, Handel, will lay out his whole genius and skill upon the Messiah, that the composition may excel all his former compositions, as the subject excels every other subject. The subject is Messiah. So you better do a good job. We know that the work on the Messiah began no later than 1739. Late in 39, Jennens wrote to a collaborator about Handel, I've been preparing a collection for him from scripture, which is more to my own taste, and by his own confession, to his too. And there's no doubt they work very closely together in cobbling together this drama called the Messiah. Most of the work involved crafting a universal, non-denominational drama, while their sacred oratorio, which is what he called it, has a lot from Isaiah, from the Old Testament, and Corinthians, New Testament. It pulled together from 11 other locations: Psalms, Lamentations, Zechariah, Malachi, Haggai, Luke, John, Matthew, Hebrews, Romans, and Revelations. They spent 2 years putting together this story. They cobbled together 51 different selections from 13 different sources to compose this unique drama. So the deliberations over the selection of the excerpts, and you'll hear as we go through some of this, was, I contend, at least half the battle. 2 years of work on the project ended with Handel's intense 23 days of setting the work to music. Now, people make very much of this extraordinary 23 days, and it is extraordinary. But I'll give a taste as to how a lot of the compositional work had been addressed in working out the drama. I'm not going to prove it tonight, but Handel basically had this thing worked out. He was great, and doing what he did in 23 days is remarkable, but it's more remarkable, this 2-year project to put together a whole different good narrative. Good drama. The passionate Republican sensibilities of Handel are never better displayed than in the Messiah, and it could be said to hold second place only to Shakespeare in terms of a powerful and widespread force for good in the English culture. I'm saying over 400 or 500 years. Those two things, the choruses around England, having chorus members engaged in singing the Messiah, whether they understood everything that was going on or not, was one of the most positive Republican events, besides attending Shakespeare plays and working on that. Handel finished the Messiah in the late summer 1741, around the same time that he accepted the offer of William Cavendish, the Lieutenant Governor of Ireland, to tour the country for a series of benefit concerts over what would be a 10-month period. I have no idea whether Cavendish was a jerk or whether he was doing something particularly good. And maybe Colin can tell me more about Cavendish, but I'm clear that Handel decided. The idea was Messiah was going to be performed in London. Handel changed the plans and did this 10-month tour of Ireland, and took the Messiah with him. And he's the one who arranged with Jonathan Swift for the first performance in April 1742 as a benefit for the Dublin's Orphan Hospital. Excuse me. So let's go through quickly. The Messiah is in 3 parts. They make an announcement at the beginning. The Lord is coming. Quote, prepare ye the way of the Lord, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be exalted, and every mountain and hill made low, the crooked straight, and the rough places plain. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. Excuse me. So everything's not yet smooth. There's work to do to get it to be smooth. The heavens, the earth, the sea, and the dry land, and all nations will be shaken. Who's capable of doing this type of work? Quote, But who may abide the day of his coming? And who shall stand when he appeareth? For he is like a refiner's fire. Meaning you better be up to the job to prepare the way of the Lord coming. So here's a start. On the happy announcement that Emmanuel is God with us, the alto calls for a political movement. Alto sings, "O thou that tellest good tidings to Zion, get thee up into the high mountain." It's not to be a hermit. It's to everybody can hear you. "O thou that tellest good tidings to Jerusalem, lift up thy voice with strength. Lift it up, be not afraid. Arise, shine, for thy light is come." And the chorus responds, repeating, "O thou that tellest," and they go through, they're into it. They're into the political movement. The bass comes in, he describes the role of the light that they're supposed to spread. "Darkness shall cover the earth, and gross darkness the people. But the Lord shall arise upon thee, and his glory shall be seen upon thee. And the Gentiles shall come to thy light, and kings shall come to the brightness of thy rising. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined." And the chorus gets it. They say, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." That's a different government than what they've been used to. So that's the next section is really, I think, just give an example of how the everyday guy.
David,
Yeah.
do you want the examples there?
Good question. Not that first one. I don't have time for. If you want to take extra time, we can give the examples. I have 5 examples prepared.
Okay.
So on the example of the shepherds, but it could be steel workers, craftsmen, whatever, as to how to organize the population. The shepherds abiding in their field. They're doing their job. Angels come, they announce to the shepherds the birth of the righteous Savior. And now a heavenly chorus explains the significance. It means peace on earth, goodwill towards men. And one angel steps forward. He is the righteous Savior, is what she sings, and he shall speak peace unto the heathen. Another angel in alto says, "Then shall the eyes of the blind be opened, and the ears of the deaf be unstopped." And this angel uplifts the shepherds to the essence of their work. It connects them. He, meaning Jesus, shall feed his flock like a shepherd. So the first angel, the soprano, with the set to the exact same music, but with different words, says, "Come unto him, all ye that labor. Take his yoke upon you and learn of him, for he is meek and lowly of heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls." It's an interesting idea. The chorus's response, they like what they've heard. This type of work, that's when they say, "His yoke is easy and his burden is light." And they're contemplating taking on this type of work. And that's good. They're optimistic. And now we're into part 2, Handel's part 2. There are 3 parts. Turns out organizing the world, it's talked about as the Passion of Christ, but it's organizing the world is not so easy. The first thing sung is, "He was despised and rejected of men," the alto. "But he gave his back to the smiters, and his cheeks to them that plucked off his hair. He hid not his face from shame." It's a different way of acting. The chorus starts to absorb some of the difficulties involved, some of the sorrow that Jesus has gone through. They sing, "Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. He was wounded for our transgressions." So they're starting to allow themselves to feel some of the sorrow. But in the model of Jesus' dealings with the smiters, it suggests a different pathway forward. So they end up singing this wonderful fugue, "And with his stripes we are healed." With the assaults upon Jesus, there's a pathway forward, actually. So I do want to hear the entrance of the 4 voices on "And with his stripes we are healed." Do you have that ready? great. I want to hear more, but I mean, this is good, but it turns out the problem is not going to get yet solved on this level. The tenor comes in. All they that see him laugh, excuse me, all they that see him laugh him to scorn. They shoot out their lips and shake their heads. At this point, the chorus acts out what the tenor is saying about these people doing the mocking. And we'll have an example of this. What they're saying is, he trusted in God that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him if he delight in him. Just mocking. We have that passage now?
Yeah. Oh, you got it.
Very good. It's one of the harshest parts of the Messiah. So despite some having begun the process of healing, they saw the example of Christ. They had some empathy with his troubles. Others are nasty, even sadistic. We know this happens in the world. The tenor says, thy rebuke hath broken his heart. He is full of heaviness. He looked for some to have pity on him, but there was no man, neither found he any to comfort him. Behold, and see if there be any sorrow like unto his sorrow. He was cut off out of the land of the living. For the transgressions of thy people was he stricken. Then he says, but thou didst not leave his soul in hell, nor for matters to end in such corruption. There may be an ugly mocking in this world, but that doesn't undo that this is a created world. And since Martin Luther King's 94th birthday is Sunday, I'll add, it turns out that the moral arc of the universe indeed does bend toward justice. Even people doubt that sometimes. The chorus responds to this with a sort of celebratory optimism. They sing, lift up your heads, O ye gates, and be ye lift up, and the King of glory shall come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty. So, there's hope. The tenor, he's probably a troublemaker. I don't know. He appears to test the chorus, as far as I can tell. He says, well, unto which of the angels did God intervene? Sort of I think the chorus doesn't take the bait. They say, well, let all the angels of God worship him. I take this simply as a measure that Handel and Jennings wanted people to know. They measured the progress of the chorus as they watch this, because this is also happening to the audience. They're participating as they go through this. So let all the angels of God worship him. How do the angels worship him? Well, they explain that he has ascended, and in the process, he has, quote, received gifts for men. Yea, even from thine enemies, he has received gifts, even from thine enemies, that the Lord God might dwell among them. There's even hope for carrying that out. Chorus gets pretty excited. They're singing, the Lord gave the word. And it turns out there are many preachers of the word now. Many of the members of the chorus now want to take on the job that the Lord has given. And the angel sings, how beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel and bring glad tidings of good things. The recruitment's going pretty well. The chorus says, their sound is gone out into all lands and their words unto the ends of the world. So everything's worked out, but no, not yet. The bass comes in. Now he's going to deliver a real problem. Why do the nations so furiously rage together? And why do the people imagine a vain thing? Sort of applies to today. The kings of the earth rise up and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. So there may be a lot of preachers spreading the word of the Lord, but there are powerful forces on earth in opposition, specifically kings, rulers. What's to be done? So the chorus, how do they react? They don't go back home. And set to very bold music by Handel, what they sing is, "Let us break the bonds asunder and cast away their yokes from us." This is away from the kings and the rulers, just to be clear. And you hear a very talented chorus. The fact that Handel sets some challenging music, it sort of sends a message, I think, that they've now gone beyond what they used to be. So the tenor hears the chorus sing that. His response is, "Well, he that dwelleth in heaven shall laugh them to scorn. The Lord shall have them in derision. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel." Now, I wanted to play this part, but I'm not going to. I like to play the next part because I played 60 or 70 different messiahs over the years. And the violinist always get to come in here and show this derision on the word derision that the Lord has for these kings and rulers. It's a wonderful little part. But now we've arrived at the famous Hallelujah chorus, and people don't remember. This is a celebration of a people that has broken their bonds and yokes of the kings and rulers, the last holdouts of those still taking counsel together against the Lord. I guarantee you that the story you hear about, oh, we all stand up at the Hallelujah chorus because the king stood up because, he was so respectful of it. One, it's not true. It's a story from, 40 years afterwards, told anecdotally. If a king did stand up, I guarantee you he was having problems with what was going on stage. So now we're into part 3, the last part. So what's else? We got a political revolution going on, kings in trouble. So what else is there to say? How does the real transformation really hasn't been addressed? Can you well, like tomorrow's event we'll go into, does assassinations or death render everything meaningless? Because we know what's happened. Dirty things have happened over the years to change history in the wrong direction. So the soprano declares rather sweetly, "I know that my Redeemer liveth, for now is Christ risen from the dead, the first fruits of them that sleep." And that elicits a response from the chorus. They understand. It starts out Handel sets it very tenuously, very uncertainly, "Since by man came death." It's not an obvious solution. But then he turns immediately, pounds home the answer. "By man came also the resurrection of the dead." You think it's a problem being mortal? Okay. But there's a solution here too. So then the bass sees the hero. He gets to come in with the answer. The bass holds the secret to all. "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of your eye." So I'd like to get just the opening part for a little bit over a minute of that section.
The last trumpet.
Okay, maybe that's good right there. Hold on right there, yeah. So the next words are, "The trumpet shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed." How? "For the corruptible must put on incorruption, and the mortal must put on immortality." Is it a paradox? Is it a coincidence of opposites? You're mortal, fine. Put on immortality. Choose to organize your mortal time on earth from the standpoint of immortality for generations and generations to come that you'll never see. I'm not sure if I got the examples correct here, but Go ahead and continue if you would, if you could, right where we stopped. And if you can't do that, just pick that last section that I have.
And we shall be changed, and we shall be changed, and we shall be changed, we shall be changed, and we shall be changed, and we
that's good.
shall be changed.
I'm a little bit confused. Jose, was that the very last quote I had, or is that just going on from the previous one? That is the very last one. My mistake then. Can you pick up from where I just interrupted you? If not, we're just going to hear it from the beginning again. Yeah, I'm not hearing any sound. Want me to sing it for you? You can come back to that later. Okay, I'm not hearing any sound still. So that is what I'm claiming is what we've been driving at the whole time. You can take on and what Handel was driving at. There is a solution, even if it's not obvious. So you have one miracle is that we mortals can actually take on an immortal identity. Some people think that you can't do that. You're kidding. You got a fantasy. But there's a second miracle, which is that the power of music is wrapped up in this marvelous process. The trumpet shall sound. That's how we'll all be changed in the moment, in the twinkling of an eye. The trumpet shall sound and the dead shall be raised incorruptible. That is real beauty. Trumpet for all music. There's a certain beauty has the power to evoke within every one of us the better angel of our nature. So I'm not saying you just sit around listening to music all the time and you'll put on immortality, but there's a way that beauty can help organize your powers to do what you have to do. And that's, so it basically ends, the alto comes in with the victorious conclusion. That was the climax. The alto comes in, then shall be brought to pass the saying that it is written. And she's quoting from Isaiah. Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? And the chorus is excited. Worthy is the Lamb that was slain and hath redeemed us to God by his blood. Worthy is the Lamb to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. And then they invert that. It is going on. Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto him that sitteth upon the throne and unto the Lamb forever and ever. And what do you do once you got it? You're transformed and you know your identity. Of course, you sing a fugal amen, and that needs to be listened to on its own. But I'm saying a population that can find their own unique sovereign part as part of a fugue, one of four voices in a fugue, as necessary for the other three voices and for the higher attainment of the whole fugue and the higher attainment of their own society, while they maintain their own unique sovereign identity. Those people sing a Handel fugue at the end of the Messiah. So that's the organizing of the chorus principle. Thanks.
Thank you. So this is for both of you. I guess Jose will get us all up here just to play the devil's advocate a little bit. So do you think Handel actually believed in all this stuff, or was it just taking these words from the music?
Well, let Colin have a shot. I think I said it before. I think Jennings and Handel worked assiduously at this. I think a normal preacher at the time would be horrified that they pasted together all these different sections to compose this particular story.
I'm curious about Jennings just because he was sort of like some aristocratic connections and was quite wealthy, and yet that libretto of class struggle and throwing off the yoke, and I, I'm just, it's interesting that he was thinking in that way, but obviously was also benefiting from being at the top of the social hierarchy there. So I don't know if you know more about that or not, but I'm just kind of curious. I know he was a religious kind of obsessed with the religious kind, impact of the work, but just that class struggle in there, was kind of like, interesting.
There's nothing I know about Jennings that prepares. I don't know that much about Jennings, and what little I know does not explain what happened here. I think the angle that I'm relying upon is actually Handel's organizing of Jennings. I think Handel was a Leibnizian in part, as much as he understood, and Caroline very much was. And he was, maybe I didn't emphasize enough, his whole career for 25 years in England was attached to Caroline, and she was the most Republican figure. And when she was gone, you either crawl into a cave, or you crawl into a hole, or you sit there and say, what do I do? And I think Handel, the best thing he did, I think it's obvious from the funeral anthem that he did for, I think some Handel music is rather pedestrian. He's not one of my favorite composers overall. I think he really rose to the occasion over these 4 years in creating these oratorios. They're not operas. They're not, there's a lot, he did operas. He did things that I don't pay too much attention to because I think I can't figure out that they're just entertaining. They're not transformative. And I think this unique period is because of what was happening in the fight in England, where they had a very small chance. Leibniz was kept out when Leibniz organized for this royal family to the Hanover House to come in the Act of Succession in 1701. And the problem was his patroness, Sophie, died like a month or two before Queen Anne died, and the jerk son, George I, came in, and Caroline is his niece. She's married, daughter-in-law. She's married to George I's son, George II. And that's really, it's a long shot that they're going to get the upper hand in English world, because there's been an aggressive move to keep Leibniz and his group out. But that was, I think that's the way Handel kept sane through a few decades and put up with a lot of things. And I think he responded well to the challenge once his close collaborator passed away.
Maybe that's it as well, because I think Jennings was the Stuart line, and they got replaced by the Handel. So that may be in part some of that tension that I'm just speculating here, no clue. But that might make a bit more sense.
I'm perpetually confused by Whigs and Tories and all the ins and outs.
Yeah, no,
it was one thing just to have Jonathan Swift and Leibniz working in their own way. I didn't go into the story, but Handel was first sent to England in 1710, 1711, when he first joined the Hanover court, and Hanover is not yet in London. He's sent there basically to establish good relations between Queen Anne and the Leibniz and Sophie, because the Tories and Whigs are trying to play them against each other, and there's all sorts of nasty games. And Handel gets fired by George I because of that. So Graham Lowry wrote a fascinating book on the name of it, please, Diane.
How America was won.
Thank you.
Or how the nation was won. How the nation was won.
He unravels this Queen Anne period remarkably well.
Well, I think it's worth saying a little bit more about Leibniz for people listening, because people may ask, well, why was that significant? Who was he? And I think, David, you should elaborate a little bit. I mean, to my mind, he was a pioneer in pursuing a kind of truthfulness, a certain scientific rigor based on not only a profound faith that the universe was good, but that he was able to demonstrate scientifically. You could say almost in thought experiments, like what Einstein did in his mind. Leibniz used reason to demonstrate that God was perfect, because there were all kinds of arguments that God, came and created the earth, and then he had to come back magically and intervene, now and then to get things straightened out, as opposed to creating a perfect universe. And how could it be perfect if human beings have free will and choose to do bad things? Doesn't that mean a flaw? And what Leibniz demonstrated is that there is, by reason, that you can prove that there is no evil that cannot be overcome by a greater good. So the evil creates the opportunity for a greater good. And hence his idea about the best of all possible worlds, which is a very tough idea. But I think very good, because it doesn't allow people the excuse to sit back and say, oh, well, the fates, it's all predestined. I can't control anything. So here's what's going to happen. But David, maybe you should say something about this question. Why is this such a big deal? Why is Leibniz so important? And he was unknown. I mean, so viciously attacked. No one even came to his funeral. You know what I'm saying? Just these were dangerous ideas.
Yeah, that's very well done. And there's this problem of evil. Why does God allow evil into the world? As you put it, it actually is the occasion of achieving a greater good that actually would not have been accomplished some other way. And that brings up a lot of other questions. Well, why didn't God just make it easy? Why don't we make perfect automatons? So why do we have to go through all these struggles of human imperfection? After the Act of Succession in 1701, Leibniz took very personally what he thought was a cultural backwardness in England, represented by his fights with Newton, as you referenced it, that God is sitting on the sidelines. And he took on John Locke as the key philosopher. And Benjamin Franklin in 1766, I believe, when he was in London, there was the first time this work by Leibniz on Locke was published was in 1766, decades, many years later. And it works out just these questions in English culture that have to be worked out. And Franklin was fascinated, and he made a plan to go visit with the people who published the Leibniz in Germany, a guy named Raspe, R-A-S-P-E, in 1766. And what I'm leading to is basically there was a certain deeper education of Benjamin. Franklin spent 10 days meeting with these people. Then he went down to Göttingen to meet with Abraham Kestner on some of the science and electricity experiments. But he went through this work. He sought out Leibniz at a time. Here's a little bit of evil. The reason he found out about this is because when the Germans published the Leibniz in London, they attacked the publication as an ungodly work. And that got Benjamin Franklin's interest. He was right in the middle of fighting about the Stamp Act. And he saw that, and he made arrangements to go see these people. And so what I threw out before, I'll end with, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is not just a nice phrase. It's not just three things. The pursuit of happiness. Happiness was a concept, felicitas, from the Latin. And what it is that God so made the world that the liberty of man, his creativity, his free will, is necessary. And to put that in LaRouche terms, you're always going to run out of resources, no matter what level of technology you have. And you have a choice whether to start cutting off heads to match the amount of hats that you can produce, or produce more hats. And God's world that he made, that's a happy world, is one where what's necessary for life is the creativity of man. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And if Jefferson wrote the words, it was in discussions with Franklin, because what Jefferson had written a year or two earlier was life, liberty, and property for the Virginia Constitution. So that's a longer story, but it's a Republican principle which got applied to the United States because the situation in England became so imperial and nasty.
Thanks. Colin, anything else that you would like to add? Any thoughts?
No, not particularly. Not enjoying listening to it, to hear that discussion. But no, it's a fascinating to hear these connections. Anyways, going outside of some of my areas of expertise, but it's the networks there are quite interesting.
Yes. Well, I think we should wrap up. I'd really like to close with music, but I don't know what, let's see where we have things queued to. I'd love to hear that Worthy is the Lamb. Amen. That would be so appropriate.
It goes on for a while. Yeah. The other thing I didn't mention is the "We Shall Be Changed." It goes on for 8 minutes. It's a lot of
right.
A lot of activity there.
Oh yeah, we can end with the amen so people get to hear it. It's there. It's there. Jose, do you have that queued? Oh, well, why do you think it won't work? Oh, well, I could play it. How about that? Okay. So I will just say that the chorus that you're hearing is the Schiller Institute NYC chorus, which I founded in 2014, and it's being directed here by John Segerson, who put a lot of work into thinking through what Handel would have wanted. And I really actually like it very much. We were quite a new chorus at the time we did this, and not as large as we became. And now since COVID, the chorus has again shrunk, but it's going to grow again, I'm sure. And if people are interested in the chorus, you should visit SINYC Chorus. Yeah, Schiller Institute NYC Chorus, SINYCchorus.com, and sign up to join. And again, please tune in to schillerinstitute.com tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So with that, I will just close out with this, and hopefully you will be able to hear it.
Oh.